Hi, I'm Jason. I've made mistakes in the past, and I want to go ahead and start owning some of them. First of all, 7th grade, I hit that girl Amber. Amber, sorry. But you had it coming.
That's absolutely going to be the first thing that that anybody hears in this podcast.
Last week, we had talked about the interaction, one of the first encounters between Jesus and Matthew, the tax collector. And one of the things that jumped out in our conversation after we recorded was, if you look in that text, it says the Pharisees came to the disciples, and then there's a break, and it's a little bit unspecific what happens, and Jesus speaks to them. That's the pronoun used there. And then when you continue reading in the chapter, the them are the disciples, which I don't think interferes or lends to. I've tried to think, what did we say in the podcast that would interact with, but I do think it's an interesting dynamic. How different is that response from him talking solely to the disciples and not the Pharisees? And what does that look like?
Yeah.
And I don't know. It was just an interesting observation that I never noticed before.
Yeah, for sure. It was one of those things that I don't know if it materially changes like every aspect of the conversation that we had, but it is worth pointing out there. And also just a good example, if you're ever like, man, why aren't they talking about this? Why aren't they talking about that? We always talk about it. It's just after the fact. You know, you just don't worry about it. No, but genuinely, we often just don't pick up on things. You know, we are sometimes frivolous, and some would say idiotic, and we don't. Not idiotic to not pick up on every aspect of Scripture. But I just think it's one, we wanted to bring that up because it's an interesting perspective that we didn't touch on really last week, and two, to just recognize, hey, we get things wrong, and we know we get things wrong. And yeah, I'm really excited for today. It's kind of a role reversal of sorts. I am hyped up on some really good coffee, and I'm feeling energetic. Jason has taken the Connor role of more subdued, and so I am excited to see what's going to happen here. So today we're going to be in Luke chapter 18, starting in verse 9. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So, Jason, what amazes you about this?
To me, this is it's a short and incredibly powerful, revealing. Like, I wonder if my understanding of how God actually interacts with people would be significantly different if I didn't have this story. Like, I think this story pops into my head a lot. That phrase, God have mercy on me, a sinner. I use that when I'm doing kind of focused prayer and repetitive prayer. Just to center myself. That often will just jump into my mind, because it's not just. This isn't an anti-Pharisee dynamic. He's using Pharisees as an example. This is an anti-human pride dynamic. And the amazing thing about it is the answer isn't fix your human pride. Like if the tax collector had said, Lord, I thank you because I'm not arrogant like this Pharisee. Mm-hmm. I'm humble in all ways, and I give away stuff, and I'm not even going to list all my accomplishments here. He would have been in the same boat. It's the complete denial of yourself. And it's pressing, and maybe that we'll get into my, what's perplexing me later, but it's fascinating to me. This almost anti-accomplishment emphasis.
Yeah.
And it reminds me when Jesus interacts, it's a few chapters ago, when Jesus interacted with the 72 when they returned, and they're like all excited because, they'd cast out demons and they'd done these amazing things. And he's like, but don't rejoice about that. Rejoice that their name was written in heaven, which in my understanding, their name wasn't written in heaven because of their accomplishment. Their name had already been written in heaven because of their faith in him. And that's the thing that's very, I mean, at the end of the day, humanity wants to be accomplished, and they want you to know their accomplishments. And I think, I mean, ask somebody, the vast majority of humanity, I will ask a single question, and they will go on and on about it if I'm just meeting them, and they will ask me nothing of what I've done. I know people so much better than they know me because I'll ask a few questions.
I don't even know your last name. It's crazy.
Yeah. Lucas. Anyway, but it is that dynamic of we just, and I'm not sitting in judgment of, well, sometimes I do, but I'm not in general sitting in judgment of those people. I'm simply saying this is what we've been taught by the world. Mm-hmm. Who are you? What have you accomplished? What do you have to offer? And Jesus is like, no, God's economy doesn't work like that. It's the person that says, I need you.
Yeah.
And that is really amazing. Yeah, because it's counter almost everything else I experience in life.
It is. And what's really fascinating is, so like this is directly countering like a Jewish idea that, oh, the ultra successful, the elite, the knowledgeable, then that if they're those things, then that means God's favor rests upon them. That means they're in the in crowd. That means they're the ones who have it all figured out, and they're the ones that God smiles upon. And even like if you fast forward to how like modern America views, like really rich and successful people, there's some people who still have that mindset of the Jewish people. But even still, there are some people who have the mindset of like, oh, there's, they're evil, they're terrible. They have to have built it on the backs of unfair labor and, taking advantage of people. And sometimes that's absolutely the case. But still, it's this reoccurring pattern, speaking to what you said, is that when you see people who have that mindset, then achieve those things, then get that wealth, get that knowledge, become, get to that next level. They go, well, I did it the right way. I'm the one, like I'm on the in crowd. Like I didn't do it like the other person. I didn't do it like the other group of people. And it's just this attitude that what is so incredible is because it so diagnoses such a critical problem for humanity that you can't escape. There's not a single person that can't get pinned on this on a daily basis, and it's just it's so cutting and it's so astute for how we view ourselves. Like when we tell ourselves a story of whether we're the victim or whether we're, the ones fighting the good fight, doing well, and God is shining favorably on us, or the universe, or however somebody wants to phrase it to themselves. It just speaks so much to how we view success, how we view our failures, how we view how God views those things. And it's just, there's so much to unpack here. But yeah, I loved the part where you talked about how there's nobody comes out clean from this passage. Nobody comes out clean from this.
That's right. And I'll tell you, I was just thinking, one way I've noticed this that really becomes hurtful is, and this, I'm picking on somebody somewhere, so sorry if it's you, but I've known many parents who, even if they're not arrogant, it'll often come up how good their kids are doing, and I've known several of those parents that suddenly, for whatever reason, the kid's life takes a bad turn, and watching them in social situations, they don't quite know how to function anymore. It's like they're off a step, and I'm not even talking about when we're saying, all right, everybody, let's check in about our kids, we're not even doing that. And I think, and then as you said, nobody escapes this. Like I spend time, I like to say decreasingly, but probably still regularly, cycling through all the things I've done to make myself feel better, and it's not bad to reflect on the good things that God does through you. So it's one of these dynamics. We're not saying one is evil and one is not. It's the attitude of what makes you.
When you elevate yourself above another or above another group.
Right, yeah. And I think, and even in a more general sense, though I believe that is absolutely what happens here, I think the more general sense is you find your identity in your own accomplishments. In terms of when you're part of God's kingdom. That God is not interested in what you've accomplished. He's impressed. I'm thinking about the faith of the centurion, where he says, hey, Jesus, you don't have to come to my house, and he's like, oh, you have amazing faith. Well, that was him not doing something. Like the centurion could have said, look, I've been really good to your people, which everybody else was saying. But instead, he's like, hey, however you want to do it your way, because I trust you. And I believe, well, that's basically what this guy's saying. He's saying, have mercy on me, a sinner. Like, I need you, Jesus. I need you, God, on your terms. So what amazes you about this, Connor?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so much here that is so incredible and so challenging, and there's so much here that would have been outrageous to the first hearer of these words, and even the audience that Luke is speaking to. And a lot of that's missed on us. Like a lot of that is, doesn't hit as close to home because we've grown up with it. But there's still just so much there. And I think how he wraps this part up is he talks about this radical reorientation for what it looks like to be an active participant member of the kingdom of God. And it's completely different than what you'd expect. And it's completely opposite of how anything had ever really operated until this moment. And he ends it by saying, for all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He starts off by saying, for those who were confident in their own righteousness and look down upon everyone else. It's almost like this loop that keeps feeding into each other, that Jesus is acknowledging almost the paradox of what we're saying, that like you talked about, it's so easy then to become confident, as if I find myself in the position of this tax collector, if I find it so easy to go, well, at least I'm not like the Pharisee, at least I'm not like the legalist, at least I'm not like the fundamentalist, and it's this continual loop that we keep having to fight. And it's so incredible to me, one, the master way that Jesus tells the story and how he prefaces it, and then how he ends it is just so incredible. Yeah, it's just so incredible to me that what Jesus is after here, he's not necessarily even trying to tear down the Pharisee or even tear down like an individual person's specific self-righteousness, which he is. But the main thrust, the way he ends this, is by saying like, hey, the way you have viewed things before, the way you thought before was that those who were highest and those who put them at that place, that meant that God had favor on them. And I'm telling you, it's the exact opposite. And I'm reorienting the way it is. It's so challenging. And we talked about this a little last week, and I'll be done here in a second. We've heard it so many times, and so it doesn't sound as radical. But then when we actually begin to look at our lives and go, do I actually believe that the exalted ones will be humbled and the humbled will be exalted? Like, I can say that intellectually, and I can pick at moments where I practice that and I believe that and I see God doing that. But then I go, do I live my life as if this is the reality? Like, do I live my life do I just go to God occasionally as the tax collector in the scenario, or am I always trying to live out that mindset?
Something about what you said there really cut me and took it a little bit different direction. That dynamic of, well, at least I'm not a legalist. At least I'm not a
Church of Christ preacher.
Yeah, or cutting edge progressive or whatever, whoever our bad guy is, the boogeyman in our world is.
It's so crushing to know that Jesus was speaking to us. Whoever that boogeyman is, that would be how he would phrase it to us.
Yeah.
And that's cutting. And I'm trying to think now what that would be to me. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think it would be the legalist, the fundamentalist, the person who is so closed off about God. And right. And Jesus would probably look at me, and I would find myself in the position, because if I'm honest, I do feel a lot of times prideful that I have escaped that or avoided that, or however you would phrase it. I sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No. That's good. That further elaborates. I think that, as I'm just processing through, and this is how my brain works, I'm like, okay, now, should I never have a discerning eye? And of course, once you say it like that, well, of course you should have a discerning eye. So it's not that Jesus isn't saying, and certainly we're not saying, I should never have observations, that what you're doing is less, biblically correct or less spiritually mature. Those observations are going to, whether you want them or not, you're going to have them. Mm-hmm. It's almost like the Luke 7, and people would say, Luke 7, Matthew 7, where he's like, judge not lest you be judged. And then they say, so you can't make an observation on anybody's life. And he's like, well, clearly he's talking about condemnation here. He's not talking about the dynamic of us discerning, hey, what you're doing, I don't think it's right, because clearly Jesus, he's speaking right now out of discernment, mm-hmm. of saying, hey, don't think that way. This is purely talking about the motivation and this idea of where you find your identity. And he's, like, as you said, he specifically details, here's who this message is to. Now, the truth is, it's to everyone, okay? Mm-hmm. Because I feel superior to somebody, I was about to say all the time, which may be true, but at least some of the time, And I could, as a church leader and specifically a congregational leader, I'm always asking myself, what's the best for our people? is it best for them? Obviously church attendance has taken a big shift, especially since COVID. And I'm like, okay, is it better? Like, is it truly better for people to attend every Sunday? Is it better for them to attend twice a month? Is it better for them, and there's part of me that's like, well, if they are spiritually pursuing something that draws them and they're only attending twice a month, then I'm like, hey, that's different than I just disconnect for God, or, God's always last on my list. But the point here isn't, and the way I find that out is I go have a conversation with them while leaving this I'm better than you thought behind, but just being truly curious of how's this affecting your walk with God? Does that make it better? Does it make it worse? Assuming that regardless of what they have to say, God has something to teach me in that.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think I can do this one time, but living it out consistently is a challenge for me.
And logistically, when Jesus tells this parable, so you have the Pharisee is speaking to God, and it's almost like a projecting, almost like a, hey, everybody check out my prayer, check out, how I'm communicating to God. And the tax collector, it's between him and God, and it's solely for him. And so when it comes to and I don't think God would ever, if you have somebody you're struggling with, or somebody that you feel like, man, I don't feel like they're pursuing God in a way that they should be, and I'm in a position in my life where I could speak to that, God would not be, and you go to God with that in prayer and go, man, I'm really conflicted about what they're doing and it feels sinful. That's a lot different than projecting that out to multiple people and projecting that out to a situation and grandstanding before God. And ultimately, I think one of the sins here that we haven't even really touched on the Pharisee is that he is basically taking God's name in vain, right? He's quote unquote praying to God, quote unquote speaking to God, while trying to elevate himself, trying to be seen as this person. And the tax collector it has no interest in that. And so that's a whole other dynamic that I think is really important to touch on, is that the Pharisee is attempting to use God to belittle others. The Pharisee is attempting to use his unique position, his power, to belittle and shame other people, where the tax collector is solely focused on him and his relationship with God. And that, I think, is when you get to the heart of how do you talk about this as a church leader, or how do you deal with this as a parent or anybody who has any sort of influence. You go, well, when I have these thoughts, when I'm concerned, when I'm trying to discern a moment, what am I going towards? Am I going towards God in a genuine, how do I help these people? What do I do? What's my response? God, search my own heart in this. Or is it that and I've seen this in a lot of church leaders, and I think this is why this parable could be so powerful, of I need to be seen doing something. I need to be seen taking charge. I need to be seen because lots of people know, this was the one that happened a lot when I worked for a church, some boyfriend and girlfriend are living together. And so we have to make a big show of it, because if the certain kind of group of people in the church find out and we didn't say anything, then it's going to cause a lot of meetings and a lot of trouble. And that's just one. And so that kind of took me off on a tangent, but I think it's one of those really important things that when we think about discerning, when we think about examining other people's lives, we have to realize what is the motivation for them, or is the motivation to prop ourselves up.
Yeah, and so that helps. That does, and it builds on what I was thinking. The piece that perplexes me is this piece of I'm almost stepping back. I don't know if I'm making this a meta look at this, but it's Jesus talking negatively about another person's faith as he tells this story. Despite the fact he's not saying it's Pharisee, Levi here. He's just saying a Pharisee, a tax collector. Those would be clearly understood icons or whatever in their culture. It's interesting. This is really, it's like this pill I've taken, and now the effects are setting in. It's like, oh yeah. So how does this show up in my life as a person that is called? And you made the distinction, and I think that's really important, is, okay, so I know somebody is in a situation where they are sinning, and I'm assuming they know it's sin, and I'm assuming they know they're doing it on purpose, and I'm assuming they don't care, and simultaneously, and that's a big and, think they're part of our community. Mm-hmm. And what does this say to the community? Because 1 Corinthians is the main place that it shows up where somebody is doing something as part of the community. Now, I don't want to go on a deep dive on disfellowship, but you must understand, if the person wasn't part of the community, they wouldn't have been having that conversation, you know? Yeah. And when they say part of the community, that was a church that by everything I can tell, they were in regular community. They weren't meeting on a Sunday. You know, they were meeting all the time. They were in each other's houses. They were in each other's lives, probably very local. But still that dynamic is there. Where does judgment fit in this? Jesus is clearly sharing generically about, here's a guy that's, one could say, I'm better than the guy that says I'm better than the guy, you know, kind of thing. And I'm not even standing in judgment of Jesus. I'm just trying to piece it together for me. And I'm not looking for one definitive answer. It's just that idea of recognizing I have a wrestle in my heart.
Yeah. So what I wonder is, Jesus is very clear often, and the Bible is very clear often. The people that take on responsibility for communicating truths about God have a unique and oftentimes stronger responsibility when it comes to how they reckon with God and how God ultimately judges them. And I wonder, you know, I do think Jesus would I think this is the case, and I would have to think about it more to feel more concrete about it. But I feel very strongly that for Jesus, he's concerned with everybody, you know, in this situation. He's concerned with the self-righteousness of everybody. But for him, what he's actively seeing is a group of religious leaders who are in power, who are actively leading to the destruction of their own country, which will ultimately lead people to being slaughtered. And he sees their self-righteousness as his cause. And there is a certain extent, right, where like we all have to ultimately be responsible for our actions. But at the same time, religious leaders do have a higher degree of responsibility. And I do wonder if that a little bit of that is at play here, in that Jesus would, I think, affirm, this is for everybody. Like, this can apply to everyone's self-righteousness. But if you find yourself in a position of power over other people, if you find yourself in a position where you can do lots of harm, I mean, that's a lot of times that's what power can be. Power can be, you can be, if you're in a position, you can cause like a lot of like, so, you know, for you in your circumstance, like as a church leader, there is in terms of the community, generally speaking, you have the position and the power to do lots more harm to an individual in your congregation than a random individual has to do to you. And that's a really harsh way to look at it. But I think it's important to recognize that if you have that power, that means you have also the responsibility to wield it in a God-honoring and righteous way, in a humble way, in a non-exalting way. And I think that could be a little bit of possibly a part of an answer to what you had talked about.
I think it was really good for me to hear that. It's funny, and you've known me a long time. I am such an anti-minister in many ways. Not that I'm against other ministers, but I'm against the trappings of it, and I'm against the power of it. And we'll say things like, man, I want to be the most teachable guy in the room, and I want to be, you know, the chief servant, and, you know, these kind of things. But that doesn't mean I don't have power, you know. And I think it gives me a lot of food for thought of, how do I use my power? Because denying that you have power doesn't mean you're using it well.
Sure. Well, and
it could actually mean you're really abusing it.
And obviously, there have been times where you didn't exercise your power and your authority in a good way. But I think what you talked about, the way that you tried to be the most teachable person in the room, and the other things that you said, like that's exactly what Jesus wants for the Pharisees. Like, Jesus is constantly saying, like, repent, turn away from your self-righteous ways, turn away from what you're doing, and turn to me, rely on me. Like, I will sustain, I will lead you. And I think, like, obviously you're not going to get it right 100% of the time, but how do you not be a domineering, abusive leader? It's you turn away from those things. You completely and utterly turn your back on them, and you face forward. And so, keeping them in front of you, keeping, you know, if you know that for a trappings of an office, of a church office, you know, being called Minister Jason or Reverend Jason or Pastor Jason or wearing suits is going to make you feel more powerful, feel more in control, take an active step to not do that thing. And I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to, you know, metaphorical Jason.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah.
And I think that what you talked about, I think that is exactly, like, if Jesus was like, okay, he was speaking to an individual Pharisee, like, how do you exist in this space that is causing so much harm? Like, this organization, organization might not be the right word, but this group of people that are causing a lot of harm and are actively turning people away from the gospel. How would Jesus communicate to a single individual in that group, he would probably tell him, turn away from your self-righteous ways, turn away from the things that cause you to feel better, feel bigger, feel more important, things that cause you to exalt yourself above these people that you're saying you love and serve. And so that's what I hear when you talk about the things that you talk about, that you're trying to do that.
Man, this is really timely. My wife, there's a place we go and we exercise. She got into an encounter with a guy today, an older man, and you could tell he was looking for somebody to tell his story. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I had a clock going, okay, a minute, 2 minutes, but then he went on, he interrupted what we're doing. I was getting really irritated, and she just stayed there and absorbed it and was encouraging. And he did some cool things. I'm not even taken away from that, but I was like just mad. Mm-hmm. So I walk away and I go get cleaned up. And the first thing I said to her, and I don't remember saying this, but I guarantee you I did. I said, I don't want you talking to him anymore. It's like the jealous boyfriend, the idiot. And I don't remember, for the record, I don't remember saying that, but I believe my wife.
That's real marriage, when you can transcend jealousy into like jealousy of time, jealousy of.
So anyways, I have repented of that, of saying that. But it has a lot to do with this, and I realize I projected myself onto this passage. If you just read what Jesus said, he doesn't say, the author says, Luke says in this case, hey, he's saying this for this reason, so he has this reason, but it's not to slam them. And the most offensive thing he says is, one guy went home justified, the other didn't. Be humble. This is for both men. Mm-hmm. He's not slamming the one man. He's simply saying, hey, here's how it works with God. And that I just am recognizing I was projecting, hey, jerk, listen to this.
Yeah, and I think there's an important part here, maybe because we find ourselves like in just a very privileged age to exist, where even, we exist in such a privileged time that how amazing this would have hurt. Like, I've gone to God sometimes and been like totally broken, totally like, I'm there is no worse sinner. I am the worst. Like, Paul might say here, but like legitimately in this moment, to me, there's no doubt that I am the worst of the worst. And for a people and for a group of people that assumed that if God really cared, if you were in God's favor or God loved you, you would be rich, you'd be successful, you'd be powerful. To then be told by this rabbi, by this important figure, that I'm saying, no, the same kind of person that's going to look up to God and go, I am so broken, I am so in need of help. And for that person to go, you in my eyes, you are exalted in my eyes, you are what I'm here for in my eyes, you get it, you are a part of the kingdom. It's so challenging when we find ourselves in the perspective of the Pharisee, which is going to be a lot more often probably for you and I. But it's also so uplifting when we find ourselves in the position of the tax collector, because you're right, it can sound incredibly harsh, but when we're in the moment where we are looking up to heaven and beating our breasts, whether actually or metaphorically, that message that Jesus looks at you and me and goes, yes, hey, you're a part of this thing. I love you and I have a special place. Like, I mean, there's just so much there that is so helpful for just so many different areas of our life.
That's really good. Yeah, absolutely. So what perplexes you?
Yeah, so I guess this is maybe just a general thing with Scripture, because I love dancing with Scripture. I love teasing it out, and I love putting it all together. But I feel like we've come up against this really hard, I don't know if barrier is the right word. It's like you're in like a roundabout almost, and it's just like it's massive traffic, and so you got to figure out at what point am I going to be able to like jump in the roundabout, and nobody's giving signals, right? Like nobody's like getting a signal that are going to go, so you just kind of got to time it right to merge correctly. Not roundabout. What's the circle? What's the big circle?
I've called them roundabouts.
Roundabout work?
Yeah.
I feel like roundabout's more of a highway sort of situation.
I don't know. I have no better word for you.
Well, obviously, I have nothing to say
I
worth anybody. Anyways, the thing where instead of an intersection, you go around in a big circle and you get off, and most people don't know how to do it. And
I think it's called a circle.
Sure, it's a circle. So you know what a circle is. It's a three. I was going to try to describe a circle in mathematic terms, and I realized I haven't taken a math class in like 8 years, and oh my gosh, actually no, I had a birthday last week, so it's even longer than that, and that's wildly depressing. Anyways, so if you've ever been in a situation where you're going into one of these things, and it's clear that not a lot of people know how to do it, and you're just like, I know I need to be going in that direction, and I know kind of the path of how I'm supposed to get here, but I'm not sure when I merge, when I get off, when I don't, and I feel like in this conversation, I can see myself like getting anxiety and just kind of keep going around the circle, waiting for my opportunity to kind of get to whatever the destination would be. I don't know if you ever had that situation where you've been driving, like, and you're in like a part of town you don't know, or in a city you don't know, and you have to make like merge 6 lanes over, so you just like end up going 5 miles out of your way. And that's why Hannah should drive everywhere, because something comes over her and she's able to manage that. For me, the perplexing thing with this is there's so many different pieces here that like I feel like I have a good grasp on this piece, or a good grasp on that piece, or in a moment I can see where I understand this, or how it affects my life here, or how it might affect my life in the past or the future. And yet I just don't, like, I want that to all come together. I want the puzzle to fit. I want it to be like, okay, here's how you're humble, and that humbleness doesn't turn to brashness and turn to pride, and like I see the end of where it's supposed to be, and I kind of see the progress of how you're supposed to get there, but this just leaves so many questions, because it so diagnoses so much of the human existence, of what it is to try to be humble, what it is to try to be selfless and serve, but also acknowledging the reality that the second we recognize that, we're so in danger of getting off the track and losing our way. And so for me, it's just like this struggle with Scripture, where I go, I want Scripture now to be like, okay, this is the missing puzzle piece that you plug in, and now it's a clear path, and you've got it. Does that make any sense?
I think so. Yeah, it's that idea of, for me, especially in light of what you just said, I can tell this story, I can preach the sermon. When you start breaking it down, okay, how does this show up in this situation and that situation? It's like, and the puzzle piece in many ways is me drawing from another passage. Oh, this must be how this shows up. Mm-hmm. But I think it's also tied to that bigger dynamic of, and you see this in the Old Testament especially, because you simply have more data, more narrative data in particular. But why? Okay, so I have faith in God, and I humble myself, and I get in a bind, like, Rahab, and she lies to these guys, you know what I mean? And it saves God's people, and she's honored, she's in Jesus' lineage, and you're like, wait a minute, that wasn't humbling herself. Like, she took power there, mm-hmm. And yet God worked. And there are all examples of this, and this is where I get really crossways on this. I'm like, wait a minute, like, David was one of the proudest guys, I know, in terms of the way he interacts in the narrative. It's only when you have the backstory of the Psalms and some of his prayers, like, okay, he's got some humility there, but he does some ridiculous things that I just have to think I would have to be, at least for me, I'd have to be my most arrogant moment to even thinking about doing what he did, mm-hmm. And so, and then sometimes as apostles, I think of James and John, whether it's the encounter where their mom's there, or whether it's them alone, and Jesus saying, "Can you drink the cup?" And they're like, "Yeah, we can." And the answer should be, "No, you can't." Like, you don't even know what I'm talking about. You have no concept of what I'm talking about. And he doesn't say you should humble yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting tying Jesus's teaching with his behavior. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess you could say he certainly models this, but I would think, again, if I didn't trust Jesus, I would think almost at the cost of the truth, because mm-hmm. if humility, and of course the assumption is John and James are sitting there while he's saying this, and they are still formulating in their minds, who's going to be the most important here? Mm-hmm. I would think, to me, I'm like, where's the accountability, Jesus? They're the Pharisees. And everybody, it's not like it's not causing ripples, because everybody's indignant. Everybody's angry.
Yeah, no, I totally echo everything you said. And it's one of those things that it's so hard to have the perspective that Jesus seems to have. And if this was anybody else but Jesus, you would be like, because Jesus has built up enough trust with us, you'd be like, okay, we question, we wonder, we ask questions, but we're like, okay, Jesus is, proven enough to me to like trust him through the process and believe him when he says these things. Yet so much of the promises of Jesus seem so, like some of the promises of Jesus don't seem like they're going to come to fruition in the Bible or even in our lives. And even in the life of Jesus, like all of the things that from the disciples' perspective, from everybody who lived at that point, who was around Jesus at the moment of his death, right? Like all of the things that he had said would seem to be of no, it would all seem to have come for naught. And I think that's for me, is I have to maintain that perspective. And it's just hard because it's like, I don't know what I don't know, and I can know some things, but like, can I get to the point where I can live my life knowing and being, not even knowing, but being okay with, hey, when it talks about the humble being exalted and the meek inheriting the earth, like there's a part of that that's very real here and now, but also not yet. And that's a hard place to exist.
It is, yeah. And realizing it's not blind faith. There's data, there's stuff to consider. I think there's stuff I can point to. But at the end of the day, no matter what your belief system, there's a part you don't know. That's why it's faith. If you knew, they'd call it just knowledge, And I think if if a person there is no God, okay, well, what's the evidence of that? Well, you point to a few things, but it's not definitive, because there's other things that would point to a God, or there's not even a people of God. Well, okay, but there's some evidence to the contrary. So this is the dynamic of belief in general, is that dynamic of saying, I've got to trust something, whether I own it or not, I've got to trust something. And Jesus is the one that comes back the most trustworthy again and again, and he's proven it to me. But since he claims to be God in the flesh, then there's a problem there, because that means there's always going to be a gap. And I know if you're a person that doubts God, you're listening to this and you're like, I just want answers to my questions. I'm like, I get it. And Jesus never says shame on you for wanting answers to your questions. But multiple times, and Job jumps out at me, he doesn't come and say, stop asking questions, Job. He just says, hey, I want to put this in perspective for you. There's so much you don't know. You think it's just this. I'm telling you, there's tons you don't know. And Job's response is, oh, wow, yeah, I can't answer these questions. And then God turns around and says, Job, you're the more righteous one here. Offer sacrifice for these guys that seemed right before this interaction to be in a better standing, And this is the upside down nature of God. He wants us to trust him. There's lots of stuff to learn, lots of stuff to figure out, and lots to understand. But at the end of the day, there will always be that part where he's like, but do you trust me?
That's good. Thank you for listening to the Amaze and Perplex podcast. Grace, peace, and love.